Alright, so today, live review of the Bulleit Bourbon Barrel Strength Batch 7. I think this is like a year's batch old. I think Batch 8 is the most recent batch from 2024. I think this is a 2023 bottle. I'm not sure how I ended up with this so late. But this is Batch 7 from the Bulleit Bourbon Distillery, and this is owned by Diageo, our friends at Diageo. Um, and if you can believe it, Bulleit Bourbon is not actually producing whiskey right now. Diageo is, for efficiency reasons, decided to pause production. We'll see what that's about. In either case, this is again Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey that, of course, I acquired before weird things happened in the world. Um, and this is 60.1% ABV or 120.2 proof. It is non-chill filtered, and it is roughly 5 to 8 years old. In a number 4 new charred oak barrel, as you kind of would assume when it comes to Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey. Now, one of the interesting things about Bulleit Bourbon is they have a couple different mash bills, um, and they have a couple different yeast strains that they use. So one mash bill that they do use, for 100% certain, is 68% corn, 28% rye, 4% malted barley. So that is a higher rye mash bill. But there's two different mash bills. And I'm not 100% sure on what the second one is. I have a hard time finding what the second mash bill is. And they also have 5 different yeast strains. So they have 2 mash bills, and then each of those mash bills is fermented among 5 different yeast strains that promotes different flavors. Um, and then those different recipes are then vatted to create the Bulleit Bourbon whiskey. So this is technically like a mix of 2 mash bills and 5 yeast strains. So it's kind of like a little bit all over the place. And if you actually go to the Bulleit Bourbon Distillery, you can taste these different yeast strains and mash bills separately. And kind of see how that accents certain factors within the whiskey, but their actual bottled products are kind of like a blend of all those different recipes. Um, One also tidbit, I suppose, about the Bulleit Bourbon Distillery is it was manufactured, through Diageo's investment, and it is a carbon neutral distillery. Everything going on there is carbon neutral. So that's kind of interesting. A lot of whiskey producers. The interesting thing about whiskey is everything in whiskey is long term, right? Every time you distill something, you know that product, minimum 3 years, but it probably won't be enjoyed for another 8 to, if it's scotch, maybe even 25 or 30 years. So sustainability is very important when it comes to whiskey because everyone's thinking long term. I think if I make so much whiskey, 1 or 2% of those barrels might end up in a 30 or 40-year-old barrel. We have to consider what's going to happen in that amount of time. Is this distillery still going to be standing? So sustainability is very important in spirits production. So of course, Diageo is thinking we're going to make a carbon neutral distillery. It's 100% zero emission. And of course, since this is one of Diageo's bourbon brands, this particular brand also supplies barrels for brands you might know, like Johnny Walker or Don Julio. These are brands that use ex-bourbon barrels, to age either their tequila or scotch. So barrels from Bulleit Bourbon get used in those other endeavors through Diageo, because casks are still a hot commodity. Used ex-bourbon barrels, they're not as expensive as they used to be, but they had a price hike not too long ago. So keeping those barrels in company to reduce cost is always important, I suppose. But if you're a Johnny Walker enjoyer, there's a good chance that some of your Johnny Walker ended up with a Bulleit Bourbon barrel, but they also will probably take any barrel they can get. But of course, this is natural color. Again, Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey is not subject to E150 like we are in pretty much every other kind of whiskey. So natural color of this, and this is at barrel strength, so really it's not that dark when you consider that it's barrel strength here. This is 60.1% alcohol. So it's not like super duper dark. Um, and again, it's roughly 5 to 8 years old from the like average information that I have, which technically makes it like a 5-year-old, but it's a mix of 5 to 8-year-old barrels, depending on um, how they feel about them in their maturation cycle, I suppose. So we're going to rate this at a 100, 25 for aroma, 25 for palate, 25 for finish, 10 for texture, and 15 for my personal experience. Which I know from drinking maybe roughly 45% of this, that it's not my favorite cask strength bourbon, but it's not bad. It does run a little hot. It's not like some of those cask strengths that you drink and you're like, well, it's cask strength, but it's not that bad. No, this is hot. It's a little hot. So we give that just a minute. And of course, Ager is on here and tracked all kinds of for a signature white and orange everywhere. Oh, you're here, Bees Knees. You're here. Just in time. I don't know what it is recently, but for me, every time work's been making you work. God, how dare they? That's criminal. But every time I nose new charred oak barrels these days, the very first thing is bullshit. Yeah, very first thing I get out of them is like a powdered cocoa note, but just for like a second. Like just for like a second at first, and then it's gone. I don't know what that is, but almost all the bourbons I've noticed recently, I kind of get a little bit of that. So right now, like what's hitting me basically is just a little bit of like a brighter red fruit kind of character, like a cherry. And I do get like some of that cornbread kind of essence. A little bit of butteriness. It is a little hot on the nose, a little singy. But yeah, just like a little bit of that red cherry. Some kind of like darker cornbread. A little bit of like corn buttery kind of flavor. I'm getting a little bit of like red licorice now, so like that cherry and like maybe some of that rye getting together a little bit. Yeah, I think for me right now, like that kind of like red, not like Twizzlers, but like if you ever had like the Twizzlers pull and peel, like the like lighter colored one that you can peel them, it smells like that. Yeah, like that Twizzlers pull and peel, cornbread, corn buttery note. Maybe like a very slight amount of like, it's like spiciness. but not like super duper strong on it. And kind of like that initial fleeting cocoa powder. But yeah, it's a little hot. I know it's going to be hot on the palate too, but not too much else hit me right off the gate. And one of the things that I know about this one is, in my memory, is that there's a cornbread note that comes across really dark on the palate, like a burnt cornbread toast or something, like a dark cornbread. I don't know that it gets super duper sweet in this particular bottle, but um, there is a sweetness about that kind of like Twizzlers, pull and peel, cherry kind of note. It's like a little bit sweet, but I'm not getting like that syrup or brown sugar caramel thing at all. And there is a slight woodiness, but I wouldn't call it oak, and it's kind of faint in the background. Not like oakiness, but like softwood lumber. Um, all right. So not a bad set of aromas actually for bourbon. For bourbon, not bad. For bourbon, not bad. But we're gonna try this on the palate. Bulleit Bourbon, barrel strength, batch 7. That's gonna be hot. Cheers. Yeah, the initial sip is hot in the palate. That being said, very good flavor on the palate. Initially, right on the attack, a little bit of that kind of like licorice fruit note. Then straight into like oakiness, so that oakiness I wasn't finding on the aroma. Definitely a main player on the palate. Kind of like a growing cinnamon spice as you hold it on the palate. I'm not getting as much of that like dark burnt cornbread thing on the palate, but into the finish, we'll probably have a better sense of it in a couple of sips, but because it's quite hot on the finish. But you kind of have like that growing baking spice note. Then you get hit with kind of like that burnt toasty cornbread kind of character. You do get some of that like vanilla and vanilla and oakiness, and then kind of like as it's getting through the finish for me, I still get a little bit of right now. It's like maybe long minus at least initially. I'm getting a very slight banana. Kind of like you get off Jack Daniels or Old Forester, not Old Forester, Woodford Reserve. There's a very slight banana note at the back of the finish. And it's a little bit buttery too. So it's like actually not that bad. I'm actually interested in seeing how this develops after like I've taken the heat for a sip or two, because when I remember like previous times where we've tried this whiskey, that kind of like bitter, dark, burnt cornbread toast thing was very overpowering on this particular bottle, and maybe that's tamed somewhat with this amount of kind of oxygen. I don't want to say oxygenation because that's not right, but oxygen exposure, evaporation, and compound changes. That being said, Obviously, when we compared this one to the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, it was a month or two ago now. This one did fall a little bit short on the like overall strength of flavor, but it stands very well on its own. I think Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is just really good. It's hard to compete with that. So I'm curious if this will actually score a little bit better than I anticipated. Oh, we're hitting some butterscotch for me now. You could call it caramel too. For me, it's a little buttery, so I'm gonna say butterscotch. Yeah, that's the one thing about this particular bottle is there's some vanilla hitting me right now too. That's actually pretty good. Despite the fact there's lots of rye, it's not super rye spicy. Doesn't have nearly the same depth of rye character, at least compared to like high rye bourbon. Like where it's like really high rye. Yeah, the nose right now is like all vanilla and butterscotch. And this one is coming across a little bit more buttery than average. A little tiny amount of that red licorice thing is still there. There's the corn breadiness kind of back playing a little further back now. But it's all kind of like upfront on vanillas and butterscotch. So some pretty good development on the aroma. Of course, these are pretty easy notes to detect. It's not like hiding. That being said, it's not doing like the emergent flavors kind of thing, but it has had some development. Yeah, it's just like all sweet and vanilla right now. So on the finish, immediately quite spicy. Some of that burnt cornbread. Get into some oak character. I'm waiting for that banana. Still oak and cinnamon spice. And then like way at the back. Way at the back, like about now, is like a little bit of this banana thing. And it's like the exact same kind of banana thing you get off Jack Daniels. Palate, mostly the same. Mostly kind of the same things going on in the palate. A little bit of that slight fruity character. You get some butteriness, large oak presence. That oak kind of grows into that kind of spicy back palate. So a couple different notes, some great intensity. Of course, it's at barrel strength, but we're not hunting at all for flavor. It still drinks like maybe slightly on the hot side, but it's not too bad. The first sip is maybe like the biggest hurdle, but after that, you're kind of good. Maybe a little bit hotter on the finish than I would prefer, but it's not too bad. So we're gonna do one more sip here, and then we'll start talking about numbers. Because at this point, the palate is mostly the same, the finish is mostly the same. We've had some development on the aroma, but at this point, it's kind of settled on that kind of like vanilla butterscotch, toasted cornbread thing. And if you want to try to find some of that rye character, it's in there. So I'll just take one more sip and then probably be good. Layer of sweetness to the palate. Kind of like nondescript, simple syrup, kind of layer of sweetness. I feel pretty comfortable calling this a long finish, though. It kind of seems like it has just a little bit more legs than I'm expecting. Texture's pretty good. And now we're on like sip 3. Like the sip 3, it's like there's no heat to it. So it's not that bad. It's not like super hot. It's less hot for sure than like Alberta Premium Cask Strength, for example. So from the top at 25 on the aroma. Initially we had some of that cocoa powder into like some butteriness. It's that red pull and peel licorice. Slight softwood lumber note, a slight baking spice character, with that like kind of like darker cornbread notes, and then kind of eventually we landed on like butterscotch and vanilla. Not terribly oaky, but a good range, good intensity. We'll call it 18 and a 25. All right. All right, so on the palate, again, it's mostly like slight red fruit, pull and peel Twizzlers note, large oak presence, growing spiciness, a bit of like simple syrup. Um, you do get some butteriness in there. Dark cornbread, burnt cornbread, toasted cornbread doesn't really show up till the finish for me. Um, we'll call palate at 18. And on the finish, right when you swallow, you get some of those very loud, intense kind of cinnamon spice notes, followed by some oakiness and some burnt cornbread. Um, and then you kind of like linger on that cinnamon spice and oak note. And at the very back, you get a banana, kind of a banana thing, like a Runts banana candy artificial banana note. Again, similar to what you get from a Brown-Forman product. But it's like way at the back of the finish. Pretty long finish too. You like the finish. I like it. We'll call it 19. So out of 10, let's talk about the texture, which is pretty good. It's a pretty good texture. It's a good amount of thickness. It's not the thickest. It's pretty good. We still have to decide if this. I don't think it's more than 8. I have to decide if it's like less than 7, basically. I'm giving myself a moment because I totally mouthwashed that finish, so my gums are a little numb. Bonk. Pretty reasonable mouthfeel. Good coat. Look at the 7. So out of 15, my personal experience, my personal subjective experience with this whiskey, and if I'm gonna be honest, it's improved for me. This bottle fill, reaching this bottle fill has definitely improved it for me. Probably like, man, here and up, the whole thing kind of drank somewhat like bitter dark burnt cornbread, and that's kind of like subsided and kind of reclined into the finish for the most part at this particular point. So some Some air has kind of appreciated, I feel, this particular whiskey. That or I'm tasting it different today than I have tasted in the past. I've done a lot of comparisons with this whiskey, and a lot of them are against other cask strength bourbons. And a lot of times this one didn't really shine against those other options. But when we're evaluating it simply on its own, it's got some good merits. There's some intense flavors. There's a good variety of flavors. Mouth feels pretty good. Catching that little bit of banana fruit at the end of the finish, I think really adds something. It's something a little different that you don't kind of always get. That being said, again, it's bourbon. It's regular old bourbon. It's regular old cask strength bourbon. It's not doing anything too wild and crazy. Kind of we get the notes that we would expect. Um, they're at a good intensity. We're not like wanting necessarily for more, but we kind of get roughly what we expect. Not anything wild or interesting. Um, but it's still done a pretty reasonable job overall. But nothing that is making it stand out. Why would I grab this particular cask strength bourbon against other cask strength bourbons is the question I tend to ask in this particular part of the evaluation. And I don't really see any reason why I would pick this one over, a 1792 full proof or, a wild turkey rare breed or, again, Elijah Craig barrel proof or any of these other kind of barrel proof straight bourbon products. It doesn't do a great job of standing out against those. The main character it has that those don't really have is like bitter burnt cornbread, which is not really like that great of a thing to be unique about you. But that being said, it's not doing a bad job. It's okay. So for me, this is kind of like lower mid grade. We'll call it 6 out of 15. It's a distinct experience. It's not forgettable, but it's not doing much to stand out against other bottles of similar price point and of similar strength in the same category. So if we tally that up, if we give it a good tally there, 18 and 18 and 19. Hey, we gave it some good numbers. It's got some good numbers, despite the fact that it's not that interesting. 68. We give it a 68 out of 100. Which is great. It's actually a great whiskey. It's barely a great whiskey. So despite the fact that I kind of just said some maybe not the nicest things about it, it's impactful. The flavor's there. The aromas are there. There's some aroma depth there. You get several notes on the palate. They're all pretty intense. You get several notes on the finish. They're all pretty intense. So nothing to nothing bad going on here. It's just not standing out very much for me. It's not doing that thing.